Are you surprised to find a book on ethics dedicating 2 chapters to the topic of friendship? Perhaps the connection Aristotle made between ethics and political philosophy in the previous book makes you a little less surprised. You'll remember from the beginning of the course my definition of ethics as the inquiry into the nature of the good life and how to achieve it. Aristotle is going to make the case that our relationships with other people are a central part of the good life. At the very beginning of chapter 1, he says, "After what we have said, a discussion of friendship would naturally follow, since it is a virtue or implies virtue, and is besides most necessary with a view to living. For without friends, no one would choose to live, though he had all other goods. Even rich people and those in possession of office and of dominating power are thought to need friends most of all. For what is the use of such prosperity without the opportunity of beneficence, which is exercised chiefly and in its most laudable form toward friends?" Aristotle says that there's a direct connection of some kind between friendship and virtue. Do you think we could put it this way? Friendship makes us better people? Or maybe even more generally, friends are a necessary part of the good life. If this is so, can we also say that the good life for humans is not something we do on our own, that we need other people, and not just other people in a generic sense, but other people in particular kinds of relation to us? In the middle of the quotation, Aristotle says, "Without friends, no one would choose to live." Do you think this is true? He does make it as an absolute statement. He could have qualified it by saying something like, "Most people would choose to have friends." What evidence, either in terms of what you've seen in the world or what you can reason about the nature of the good life, could lead you to support his absolute claim? What about the contrary? Do you find reasoning or experience that leads you to think friends might be completely expendable? What he says at the end of the section quoted seems culturally distant. The root assumption is that even rich people, those we imagine might be self-sufficient, need friends. If they did not have friends, they would lack the best outlet for acts of beneficence. In the economic system of the Greco-Roman world, being a benefactor, having others that you are connected to through your acts of largesse, was entirely normal. The rich gained the loyalty of others by providing jobs, gifts, and loans. The patron is a benefactor, and the client's the recipient. The patron-client system implied at least some relationship of what Aristotle is calling love, philia. The patron loved the people below him enough to share out of his resources, and it was usually his resources, although there were some female benefactors and patrons as well. Receiving the blessings of help in turn led those so benefited to have love, some form of philia, to their patron. Our economic system today is very different. We don't have patrons usually, we have employers. Many times our employers aren't individuals to whom we might show love and loyalty, even friendship, but they're institutions. Friendship will play a different role in an economic system like our own. Toward the end of chapter 1, Aristotle mentions some of the aspects of friendship that were disputed in his culture. The first of these points deals with the likeness of friend to friend. He reports 2 sayings. Maybe you've heard at least one of these: "Birds of a feather flock together," and its near opposite, "Two of a trade never agree." Considering what you've seen and experienced in the world of friendship, how do you think friendship works? Is friendship more likely to be based on likeness, or is likeness more likely to push people apart? My own experience suggests that neither should be taken to be the whole truth. We have friends based on some commonality. The commonality may be some area of interest, a job, a hobby. It could be as simple as sharing a community or having similar traits or temperament. Here in chapter 2, Aristotle begins discussing the objects of love and how they relate to friendship. If you were to read book 8 in Greek, you'd notice something that's not obvious in English. The word for friend is philos. The word for love here in chapter 2 is phileo. Friendship is philia. Surely you've already noticed this root in the word philosophy. the love of wisdom. The other Greek words for love, eros, agape, those show up in other contexts. If I consider that friend, friendship, and love share a common root, it will help us see how this is relevant to what Aristotle has to say. Three kinds of things are loved: the good, the pleasant, and the useful. We'll see in the next few chapters that these kinds of objects of love will determine the three kinds of friendship. At 1155b, line 22, Aristotle asks, do people love then the good, or what is good for them? This apparently simple contrast between what is good and what is good for them, important questions are raised. First, Aristotle believes that there is a good which is objectively so, good whether we believe it to be good or know it to be good. Second, there is the obvious distinction here between this objective good and what is good for me. It's possible that I'm the sort of person or in a kind of situation or context where what is good is not now good for me. Third, there's the epistemological question. If there is something or some set of things which is objectively good, can I know what that is? Can I know it to be good? How would I come to recognize the good as good? Turning to the subjective side, how do I come to believe that something is good for me? How do I investigate the good to learn what it is? In either case, how do I check myself? How do I determine the rightness or wrongness of my belief? We can take another step. In what social context do we deal with questions of the good? Do we decide between a currently popular subjectivism that says there's no such thing as the good other than what individuals think in the moment is good for them, and a position that believes there is a good that is good regardless of whether anyone accepts it as good or not? The second position would treat the good as something to be discovered and learned, not merely something to be created as an act of will, the basis of desire. There are things that are good for us that we have not yet discovered are good for us. On one level, this kind of discovery can be equated with education, formal and informal. From childhood, we increasingly learn that things are good for us. At first, we might not think that eating healthfully and not just what we like in the moment is for our good. It may take us time for us to learn to value sleep and take it upon ourselves. This leads to the second level. On the first, we might imagine that we already know what is good and learn how to access it and live aligned with it. On the second level, we begin without adequate understanding of what is good for us. There might be things that are truly good for us, about which our initial attitude is one of revulsion or rejection. At line 28 or so, Aristotle brings up the possible love of lifeless things and claims this kind of love should not be called friendship. I love a good cheeseburger. I love walking on mountain trails. I do not imagine, however, that any cheeseburger or trail would be my friend. Neither can reciprocate my affection in any way. This reciprocity of love is highlighted by Aristotle here at the end of the chapter at line 34, and he concludes the chapter with this claim. To be friends, then, they must be mutually recognized as bearing goodwill and wishing well to each other for one of the aforesaid reasons. We see here in chapter 3 that there are three kinds of friendship, each corresponding to the kinds of things that are loved. The stipulation that there is a mutuality, a reciprocity that differentiates the love of people from the love of things. We see the first type described at 1156a, line 10. Now those who love each other because of utility do not love each other for themselves, but in virtue of some good which they get from each other. This is the kind of friendship that asks the question, what's in it for me? Personally, I'm disinclined to see this kind of friendship as really worthy of the name friendship. Can we call these acquaintances rather than friends? Surely, at least, this kind of relationship exists somewhere between the two. The second type is where there is a love of pleasure together. Those who love because of pleasure, it is not for their character that people love ready-witted people, but because they find them pleasant. This is the kind of friendship rooted in having fun together. If people find the same activities pleasant, they both enjoy them, then they have this second kind of friendship. Aristotle observes that both these kinds of friendship are transitory. They only last for a season, as long as the friend is useful, as long as there is common. As long as there's a common activity to enjoy, then the friendship lasts. When circumstances change and the friend is no longer useful, there's no more friendship. Or if what one finds pleasant changes, or even if there is no longer opportunity to do the pleasant thing together, the friendship fades. Aristotle goes on to see an age correlation for these two types of friendships. Old people tend to go for useful friendships, while young people will tend to go for friendships centered on fun. What do you make of this claim? Have you seen any evidence for or against his position? You see the third kind of friendship at 1156b, line 7. He says, perfect friendship is the friendship between people who are good and alike in virtue. For these with well alike to each other, qua good, and they are good in themselves. Their friendship lasts as long as they are good, and goodness is an enduring thing, and each is good without qualification and to his friend. For the good are both good without qualification and useful to each other. So too, they are pleasant, for the good are pleasant both without qualification to each other. You see that this third type of friendship combines the goods of the other two, usefulness and pleasantness, with character qualities of the persons in relation. Because this kind of friendship is rooted in the kind of person they are, which he assumes is more permanent than what may be of use to us or pleasant to us, this kind of friendship is more likely to endure. This third type is the highest kind of friendship. It is the most enduring form of friendship. But at line 24, we also see that it is the rarest kind. For Aristotle, it is rare because people of such high character quality are themselves rare. Most people, from his perspective, are satisfied with finding others who are useful or pleasant. They may genuinely wish their useful and fun friends well, but this desire is more superficial and fickle than the deep love between people of good character. I suggested at the beginning of this discussion that Aristotle's discussion of friendship follows closely upon his claim that political science deals with issues of pleasure and pain. Once we assume the close connection between ethics and politics in his understanding, the shift to talking about constitutions and their bearing on family structure and relationships may seem less strange. We'll also see, perhaps, that our word friendship is likely narrower than what Aristotle's been talking about. Friendship, in his account, points at various kinds of structured human relationships, ranging from friends to acquaintances to more generic relationships. This long first paragraph is worthy of our attention. At the very beginning, at 1160a, line 31, he claims, there are three kinds of constitution and an equal number of deviation forms. Don't let his use of the word constitution make you think of the formal written documents some of our political entities have today. Instead, by constitution, he's talking about ways of structuring political community. He calls these monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. The perversions, the deviations of these standard ways, ways that they can go wrong, are tyranny, the perversion of monarchy, oligarchy, the perversion of aristocracy, and democracy, the deviant version of democracy. Some of these terms we encounter in our regular talk about political systems, at least when dealing with them in historical perspective. Each of these terms comes to us from Greek. A monarchy has a single person ruling. Aristotle's word here being basileus, the word commonly translated king. A tyrant is also an example of a single person ruling, just like a king. The difference between the two is that where the king, the proper kind of monarch, looks out for the good of his subjects, the tyrant looks to benefit himself. Aristotle believes that monarchy is the best kind of structure for a political entity, and tyranny the worst. Aristocracy combines the Greek words aristos, which means best, and krasi, which is another word referring to ruling. Once upon a time, many societies had inherited aristocracies. Titles were passed down from parents to children. The thought was that rule was done best by the best people. In the US today, we don't have an official aristocracy. We don't have inherited titles, but we do seem to have societal elites who, either through wealth, fame, educational status, or connections, constitute the ruling class. For Aristotle, an aristocratic constitution was good as long as the elite truly looked out for the good of all. It devolved into an oligarchy, mere rule of the few, when they became consumed with wealth, particularly their own. Democracy, ruled by the honorable, devolves into the least bad deviation, democracy, ruled by the demos, the people. When Plato talks about democracy, sometimes he has military rule in mind, though I don't see Aristotle making that connection. Monarchy is rooted in the paternalism of the Greek family structure. The father, the pater, is in charge. He is wise and sees to the benefit of the family. This constitution is corrupted, says Aristotle, in places like Persia, where the king treats all his subjects not as benevolent father, but looks at his children, but as a master looks at his slaves. I see some odd claims in chapter 11. I'm interested to know what you think of that. Begins the chapter saying each of the constitutions may seem to involve friendship, just insofar as it involves justice. The friendship between a king and his subjects depends on an excess of benefits conferred, for he confers benefits with a view to their well-being, as a shepherd does for his sheep. I don't see how this so-called friendship between a king and the king's subjects is a friendship. A relationship, certainly, but a friendship? Which of the three kinds of friendship is happening here between these who are so vastly unequal? A little later on at 1160a, line 23 or so, he says, the friendship of man and wife, again, is the same that is found in an aristocracy, for it is in accordance with virtue. The better gets more of what is good, and each gets what befits him. And so too with the justice in these relations. Two things here. First, as he said at the beginning of this chapter, he's looking at the place of justice in these constitutional relationships. If you read the whole of Book 5 on justice, you'd see that the primary meaning he ascribes to justice is fairness, giving someone what they deserve. Second, is this how you look at marriage? Some of you are married. You have experience with the institution. Does this description of friendship and marriage fit your experience? What about you who are not married but have observed marriages and how they work? Or even those of you who aspire to marriage someday. Are you looking for an aristocratic style relationship with your wife or husband? The strangest part of the chapter is toward the end, moving from 1161a to 1161b. He says, where there is nothing in common to ruler and ruled, there is not friendship either, since there is not justice. For example, between craftsman and tool, soul and body, master and slave. The latter in each case is benefited by that which uses it. But there is no friendship or justice toward lifeless things. But neither is there friendship toward a horse or an ox, not to a slave, qua slave. For there is nothing common to the two parties. The slave is a living tool, the tool a lifeless slave. Qua slave, then, one cannot be friends with him, but qua man, one can. For there seems to be some justice between any man and any other who can share in a system or law, or be party to an agreement. Therefore, there can also be friendship with him insofar as he is a man, a human. Surely you see the problem here. As long as Aristotle is talking about craftsmen and their tools, maybe there's no problem. The two things in view are entirely different, so friendship is not possible. But notice what he says about slaves. First, you might take note of that little word qua our translator uses. That's a Latin word that philosophers use in many contexts. In most cases, we can get by with translating it as. So he's saying that because master and slave are so totally different metaphysically, when we're considering a slave as a slave, there is no possible friendship with the master. But if we look at it from another angle, the slave, qua human, the slave as a human, there can be friendship. A couple of thoughts here. First, if someone treated me either at his own volition or at the behest of the law as a tool, then I wouldn't be interested in being a friend with that person. Second, the anthropology to which I subscribe requires me to consider all people as equally human. None are objects, whatever their role in any economic or political system, whether they set themselves or are determined by circumstances to be friend or foe, they count as human. I am in the wrong then whenever I treat a human as an object, as a tool, or as something less than human. Some systems of slavery throughout history may not have succumbed to the anthropology we see in Aristotle, allowing for a more temporary and limited treatment of people as slaves. Note here that anthropology, insofar as it speaks of the nature of the reality of humans, is a subdivision of metaphysics. The system we had in America, unfortunately, fit well with Aristotle's understanding, treating those held as slaves as nothing more than living tools, mere objects to be used and treated and thrown away as the owner of those objects saw fit. As a Christian, I find it deeply disturbing that so many who claimed the same faith I do were in line with Aristotle on this. Every form of friendship, then, involves association. The word translated association is koinonia. It refers to a situation of having things in common, sharing in things. In your experience of friendship, whether your own friendships or those you have observed, how have you seen this worked out? What kinds of things do friends have in common? To what degree, if any, is the having things in common voluntary on the part of those who are friends? To what degree, if any, does this sharing seem to take place naturally? What has it looked like in your experience?